Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
Right.
Today, we're strapping on the gloves, metaphorically, of course, and stepping right into the octagon
Oh,
to uncover the science behind winning in the UFC,
all right.
thanks to the incredible work being done at the UFC Performance Institute.
Yeah,
And a huge thank you to our sponsors for making this deep dive possible, RaptorocK MMA and Fitness.
yeah,
Be sure to check them out at www.raptorok.com for all your training needs.
absolutely.
So we always talk about, the physicality of fighting, but the UFC Performance Institute, they've really gone in deep, data-driven insights from hundreds of fighters, thousands of data points.
It's fascinating. I mean, it really is taking kind of this idea of what we think of with combat sports, that it's purely physical,
Right.
and really kind of dissecting it, looking at injury patterns, even optimal sleep strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not your average sports analysis. We're going deep. And one of the things that really jumped out at me when I was going through their research is that fights, they're won and lost in different ways, depending on the weight class.
Yeah.
It never would occur to me, I don't know, maybe I'm just slow, that a bantamweight's path to victory might look totally different from a heavyweight.
Yeah, it's true. And it makes sense when you think about it, right? Because if you look at the data, lighter weight classes tend to have a higher success rate with submissions.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas heavier weight classes, it's all about that striking power, those knockouts.
Right. Yeah.
So naturally, their training has to be tailored accordingly.
Makes sense when you put it that way, but how do you how do you study something as chaotic and unpredictable as a fight?
That's the question, right?
Where do you even begin?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of what the UFC Performance Institute is doing.
Yeah.
We're using these incredibly detailed fight analyses,
Okay.
breaking down every single strike,
Wow.
every grapple, even the time spent in different positions.
So you're saying, they're watching every second of every fight and analyzing it.
Exactly. They're analyzing it second by second.
Wow.
And that's what allows them to find these trends.
Oh.
Like the fact that, and this is one that really surprised me, most fights are won at a distance.
At a distance, you mean standing up?
Standing up, not grappling, not on the ground.
Really?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I would have thought way more fights were won with grappling and ground game.
It seems counterintuitive, right? But the data's clear. Over 60% of victories happen while the fighters are standing.
Wow. Over half the fights are won standing up. That's crazy.
It really highlights something that the UFC Performance Institute emphasizes. Mastering stand-up striking. Absolutely crucial for any aspiring UFC champion.
So understanding those patterns,
Mhm.
that gives a fighter a serious edge.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just the physical techniques, right?
Okay, yeah.
They're looking at the whole picture, injury prevention, nutrition, you mentioned sleep, the psychology of a fighter.
That's what I mean by holistic. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
How much goes on behind the scenes to prepare these athletes?
Yeah, one thing that really stood out to me was this emphasis on individualizing training plans.
Okay.
So they're not just saying, hey, everybody do this. They're looking at the individual. They're doing physical assessments, measuring power output,
Wow.
metabolic rate.
Okay.
And then they're also doing technical evaluations of that fighter's strengths, weaknesses.
So it's like personalized medicine, but for fighting.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
It's all about maximizing each fighter's potential by really understanding that their unique strengths and then also where they need improvement, right?
This is blowing my mind already, and I feel like we're just getting started.
Oh, we're just scratching the surface.
What other surprising insights have they uncovered?
Well, one of the things that they found, and this one kind of surprised me, a lot of the injuries, a large portion of them, happen during training, not in the octagon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I would have thought it was the opposite,
It's a common assumption. You think, oh, these guys are in there, exchanging blows.
Yeah,
but
where they're getting hurt.
right. But the reality is these athletes are constantly pushing their limits, even in training, right?
Okay, yeah.
They're sparring, often at near-fight intensity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's where a lot of those injuries occur.
That's fascinating. So how do they use that data to actually help the fighters?
Well, they've completely overhauled their approach to injury prevention.
Okay.
And it all starts with kind of this thorough orthopedic evaluation for each fighter.
Okay, so walk me through that. What are they looking for?
Basically, think of it like a really detailed checkup for their musculoskeletal system.
Okay.
So they're assessing things like flexibility,
Yeah.
range of motion,
Right.
any pre-existing conditions, anything that might make a fighter kind of susceptible to injury.
So they're trying to find those potential weak points before they become a problem.
Exactly. And then based on that evaluation, they can tailor warm-up routines, training regimens, even things like, nutritional guidance.
It's amazing.
It is.
How much goes on behind the scenes. It really is that holistic approach.
Oh, absolutely. And, they're finding that things like, for example, neck mobility is so crucial
Really?
for withstanding those blows to the head.
Huh. I never would have thought about that.
Right. It's not the first thing that comes to mind.
No.
But they're finding that a lot of those issues, they stem from limited neck mobility.
Interesting.
So they're incorporating specific exercises, stretches, strengthening the muscles that support the neck.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one they use is called a scapular-controlled articular rotation.
Wow. I can't even imagine what that looks like.
It sounds very complicated, right?
Yeah.
But essentially what it involves is moving the shoulder blade in the circular motion while keeping your neck stable.
Okay.
And what that does is it helps build strength control in those muscles that are often neglected.
That's fascinating. So they're trying to strengthen those muscles to protect the neck.
Exactly. And you prevent those sudden, forceful movements.
Right.
Which can be very dangerous in the octagon.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of strength, they've also kind of dispelled some myths about body composition.
Oh, really?
In fighting.
Interesting. I'm all ears. This is so interesting because for so long, it's just been about the number on the scale.
Right. Yeah, for years it was all about making weight.
Right.
And fighters would go to, extreme lengths to cut weight before a fight.
Yeah, and not always in the healthiest way.
No, absolutely not. The old approach, it was all about calorie restriction.
Right.
Which, in the long run, not healthy.
Right.
Not sustainable.
Yeah.
So the UFC Performance Institute has really shifted that focus, away from just body weight to overall body composition.
Okay.
So really emphasizing things like lean muscle mass, minimizing body fat.
So it's not just about being light, it's about being lean and powerful. Exactly. And they're using these, really advanced techniques like DXA scans, which, they can actually see how much muscle someone has,
Wow.
where their body fat is distributed, even their bone mineral content.
Wow.
So you're getting a really clear picture of kind of the fighter's body composition.
So they're not just guessing.
Yeah.
They have hard data to work with.
Exactly. And then they can take that data and they can actually, do something with it.
Right. What do they do with it?
Well, they personalize the fighter's diet, their training.
Mm-hmm.
For example, they might find that a fighter needs to really up their protein intake to build muscle, or maybe they need to adjust their training to shed some fat and gain some lean muscle.
It's like fine-tuning a high-performance engine.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but how do they actually manage that weight-cutting process while also making sure that these fighters are fueled up and ready to perform?
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It really is, yeah, because you can't, it's...
Yeah, you can't have them depleted.
Oh, right.
But they got to make weight.
Right.
So the UFC Performance Institute starts with what they call the Weight Management Preparedness Score.
Okay.
And this looks at, the fighter's current body mass, their body composition, even things like their resting metabolic rate, to really assess, how ready are they to cut weight safely and effectively.
So it's about making sure they're cutting weight the right way, not just the fastest way.
Exactly. It's not about, just getting them as light as possible. It's about doing it the right way.
So how does the actual weight cut work?
So based on that score, they create a personalized, what they call a weight descent plan for each fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And this includes things like dietary adjustments, obviously, training modifications, and even hydration protocols.
Hydration protocols. Actually, that one surprises me a little bit. You would think they'd want to limit water.
It's a common misconception, right? You think, oh, less water, less weight.
Right.
But actually, dehydration can really slow down the metabolism, which makes it harder to lose weight.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
So they actually use a technique called water loading.
Okay.
And this involves kind of strategically increasing water intake leading up to the weigh-in, and then they taper it off in those final 24 hours.
Interesting.
And what that does is it kind of tricks the body into flushing out more water.
Oh, wow.
So they can shed those last few pounds.
That's fascinating.
Without getting dangerously dehydrated.
That's really, really interesting and much healthier.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like.
Much healthier.
So they're using this data to change how fighters think about their diet, their training, even just something as simple as drinking water.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all connected, right?
It really is. All this preparation is great. But what about what happens during the fight itself? Like, what have they learned about what actually wins those fights?
Well, one of the most, I think, significant findings is just the importance of fighting at distance.
So not just grappling, but those stand-up exchanges we talked about earlier.
Exactly, exactly. Their data shows that over 60% of UFC fights are won while standing up at distance.
60%. I mean, that's a huge.
That's
It
huge.
really drives home how important that is.
It's not just about, being a good grappler
Right.
or being good on the ground.
You got to be able to hold your own.
You got to be able to straight distance.
And you got to be able to control that distance.
Right. And it's not just about throwing punches. There's got to be more to it than that.
Well, yeah, and that's what they found. They've identified specific techniques and strategies that are more likely to lead to victory at distance.
Like what?
Well, for example, fighters who control the center of the octagon tend to have a much higher win rate.
Interesting. What makes that so important, controlling the center?
Well, it allows them to dictate the pace and direction of the fight.
They can keep their opponent on the defensive,
Okay.
force them to react instead of kind of being the one dictating the action.
So it's about controlling the fight, not just reacting to your opponent.
Exactly, exactly. And so they work on the UFC Performance Institute. They have specific, footwork drills, tactical strategies to help fighters kind of master this element of the game.
And they use, traditional, video analysis and drills for that, or are they doing anything different?
They're using, more traditional methods, but also some really cutting-edge stuff like VR, virtual reality simulations.
Wow, VR simulations for fighting. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's incredible, these VR systems. They allow fighters to kind of experience different fight scenarios.
Oh, wow.
But in a controlled, safe environment.
So they can work on, reacting to different attacks, trying out new techniques without the risk of getting hurt in sparring.
Exactly, exactly. So it's a really, really valuable tool.
That's amazing. Are there any other ways they're using, technology to kind of train these fighters?
Well, they're also using it to revolutionize the mental game.
Oh, right. Because we can't forget about the mental side of fighting.
Huge.
Especially in MMA, which is so demanding.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the mental game is half the battle, if not more.
So what kind of, mental training techniques are they using?
Well, one of their core techniques is visualization.
Okay.
So having fighters mentally rehearse their performance. So they're imagining themselves in the fight.
Okay.
Executing their techniques flawlessly.
Right.
Achieving their desired outcome.
So they're getting their minds ready for that moment, visualizing themselves winning.
Exactly. And they even incorporate, video analysis into these visualizations.
Oh, wow.
So they're watching footage of themselves, their opponents.
Okay.
So they can really kind of visualize specific improvements.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's really about kind of rewiring their brains for peak performance.
I love that. That's so cool. So it's not just, training the body, it's training the mind as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's mind and body, working together.
Now, speaking of training the body, let's talk about those kind of grueling physical regimens that these fighters endure.
Yeah, we're talking intense training here.
Yeah. How do they balance pushing their limits without pushing them too far and getting injured? What does that actually look like?
So they use what's called a periodized training approach.
Okay.
And essentially what that means is the intensity and the focus of the training changes throughout the weeks and months leading up to a fight.
So they're not just going 100% all the time.
No. You don't want to peak too early. You don't want to burn out.
Makes sense.
So they break it down into these distinct phases.
Okay.
So you have, kind of the off-season training.
Okay.
Although, with these athletes, it's not really an off-season.
Right. They're always training and preparing even when they don't have a fight scheduled.
Exactly. So, but this is kind of like their base training.
Okay. Building
that foundation of strength, endurance, technique.
So it's about strengthening those core elements before adding in the intensity.
Exactly. So they're addressing any weaknesses.
Okay.
They're working on new techniques, really making sure that the fighter is in peak physical condition.
Okay.
And then as the fight gets closer, we move into what's called pre-camp.
Pre-camp. Okay. So what changes in pre-camp?
So the training gets way more specific to the upcoming fight.
Okay.
So they're analyzing the opponent.
Right.
They're looking at their fighting style, their strengths, their weaknesses.
So if they know their upcoming opponent is like, really good at grappling,
Yeah.
they'll spend more time on, takedown defense.
Exactly. They're going to try to exploit those weaknesses, prepare for those strengths.
It makes the training really targeted then.
Very targeted, and the volume and intensity also increase significantly.
Okay.
So more sparring, more high-intensity drills, they're really pushing those limits.
Seems intense.
It's grueling, both physically and mentally.
Wow, so they're getting put through the ringer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you have fight week preparation.
Okay, so this is like the week leading up to the fight.
Leading up to the fight, exactly.
What's the focus then?
Fine-tuning, recovery, and, of course, making weight.
Okay.
So they actually taper down the training volume to allow the fighter's body to recover.
Right.
But the intensity stays high.
Okay.
Because they want to maintain that sharpness, that timing.
So it's like they're walking this tightrope of, staying sharp, but also getting enough reps.
It's a delicate balance, yeah.
And making weight.
Exactly.
Wow.
But the UFC Performance Institute, they've got it down.
That's really, really fascinating, this whole periodized training approach.
Yeah, it's very strategic.
It makes so much sense. It's strategic, it's individualized, and it's designed to get these fighters in peak condition for fight night.
Exactly.
Both physically and mentally.
Mind and body.
It's really, with all this, it's no surprise that they've had so much success.
It's remarkable. And, we've only scratched the surface.
Oh, there's more.
There's so much more. We've got more amazing insights to uncover when we come back.
You're right. There is so much more to uncover.
Yeah.
What other secrets does the UFC Performance Institute have up their sleeve?
Well, we've got to talk about how they build those, incredibly strong, explosive athletes.
Right.
Their strength and conditioning program.
Yeah, because we can't talk about the science of winning without talking about, the physical force that these fighters bring to the octagon.
Absolutely.
So what's their approach? Is it just like, lift the heaviest weight possible?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But it's much more nuanced than that.
Okay.
They're really focused on maximizing power output while also minimizing that injury risk.
Right.
So they use a variety of training methods. You've got your traditional weightlifting, of course.
Right.
Plyometrics.
Yeah.
Even things like Olympic lifting derivatives.
Olympic lifting, wow, for fighters. What makes that so effective?
It's all about developing that explosive power, right?
Right.
Those quick bursts of energy that you need for a takedown, for a strike, for everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really, really effective for that.
Right. And it's not, obviously, you can't just have every fighter doing the same thing.
No, it's got to be tailored.
Right. So how do they figure out like what each athlete needs?
They use a variety of assessments.
Okay.
One example is they might use something called an isometric mid-thigh pull.
Okay, I have no idea what that is, but it sounds
very scientific.
It sounds intense.
It's a way to assess lower body strength.
Okay.
So they're literally measuring how much force a fighter can generate with their legs.
Wow.
Which is a really good indicator, not just of leg strength, but overall strength and power.
So if a fighter's like, not scoring very high on that, then they'll know to, incorporate more squats and deadlifts.
Exactly. They're going to work on those weaknesses.
Okay.
Really try to bring those up.
But it's not all about, brute strength.
No.
They're also thinking about speed, agility.
Huge in MMA.
It's a fast-paced sport.
You got to be able to move.
Yeah. Those like, lightning fast dodges, those explosive transitions are like just as impressive as, a knockout punch.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do they train for that?
So they use a range of drills,
Okay.
Things like cone drills, ladder drills,
Mm-hmm.
even something called reaction ball training.
Reaction ball. Tell me more.
So they use this ball that basically bounces unpredictably, and the fighter has to react, and they got to change direction.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Really, really good for hand-eye coordination, reflexes.
That makes sense.
Really important stuff.
So it's like they've designed a training program based on what actually happens in a fight.
Exactly. It's very specific.
Not just like, lifting weights in the gym.
Yeah, it's functional.
And then they emphasize recovery.
Oh, huge.
Because you can't go hard all the time.
You'll burn out. Right.
You need that recovery.
So what does their recovery look like?
They use a variety of things, massage therapy, cryotherapy, those ice baths that you always hear about.
Right.
Even things like sensory deprivation tanks.
Sensory deprivation tanks? What is this?
So these are also sometimes called float tanks.
Okay.
Essentially, these light-proof, soundproof pods
Wow.
filled with salt water.
Okay.
and the fighter just floats
Okay.
in complete darkness and silence.
So, like, what's the benefit of that?
It's all about relaxation,
Okay.
recovery, right? Reduce stress,
Okay.
ease those sore muscles, promote restful sleep.
So it's like hitting the reset button. Exactly, for both mind and body.
It sounds incredible, like a spa treatment for these, like, warrior athletes.
Yeah, but it's essential, right? It highlights that holistic approach that they take.
Absolutely.
You know, looking at every aspect of a fighter's preparation.
Now, it's not just about the fighters themselves.
No.
They also prioritize educating the coaches and the trainers.
Oh, huge. Those coaches, they play such an important role.
They really do.
They're the ones working with these athletes day in and day out.
Right, yes.
So they offer, you know, the UFC Performance Institute, they offer these programs, workshops for coaches so they can stay updated on the latest.
So they're getting, like, continuing education to stay on top of their game.
The latest training strategies, the recovery stuff, the nutrition, everything.
That's so smart because it's like you're creating this whole ecosystem of knowledge and expertise.
Exactly.
All with the goal of helping these fighters be the best they can be.
Yeah, it's really a team effort.
It really is. This whole deep dive has been amazing.
It's fascinating stuff.
It is. The UFC Performance Institute is on another level.
Oh, absolutely.
They're revolutionizing the sport.
Yeah.
With their data-driven,
the future,
holistic approach. It's really incredible to see, like, how much work goes into preparing these athletes.
It's not just about, you know, stepping in the octagon.
Yeah.
They're doing the work behind the scenes.
Yeah, this has given me a whole new appreciation for what goes into, you know, winning in the UFC.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
It's not just about, you know, who can punch the hardest.
It's the science behind it.
It really is. It's the science. It's the strategy. It's fascinating.
It is.
And speaking of seeing all this in action, I hear there's an incredible event coming up.
Yes. The Versus Promotions and Versus Grappling event.
Yes.
Happening on November 2nd.
Okay.
At Hartfeld Arena.
At Hartfeld Arena.
In Pretoria.
In Pretoria. All right. So for all of our South African listeners,
it's going to be huge.
You do not want to miss this.
It's going to be an incredible night of fights.
Yeah, and you can bet that we'll be seeing a lot of these techniques and strategies that we talked about.
Oh, absolutely. Put to the test.
In action.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Well, a huge thank you to our sponsors for making this deep dive possible.
Yeah.
RaptorocK MMA and Fitness.
Absolutely.
Make sure you visit them at www.raptorok.com for all of your training needs.
For sure.
And to the UFC Performance Institute. Thank you for this incredible wealth of knowledge.
Really amazing work they're doing.
It's incredible. And to all of our listeners, as always, thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
On this deep dive into the science of winning.
Keep exploring.
We'll see you next time.